The afternoon sun slanted through the tall, dusty windows of the East Side Community Center, painting golden stripes across the scuffed wooden floor. Inside the small music room at the back, barely big enough for the old upright piano, 2 folding chairs, and a stack of mismatched sheet music. A 16-year-old girl sat hunched over the keys, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her fingers moved carefully, slowly over the black and white notes, trying to coax out Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It wasn't coming easily. She'd been practicing for weeks, ever since she found out about the Northwest Youth Piano Showcase. It wasn't a huge competition, maybe 50 kids from around the state, but to her it felt like the Olympics. Her parents, who'd immigrated years ago with little more than hope and worn-out suitcases, had saved for months to pay for her lessons. They never said it out loud, but she could see it in the way her mother stayed up late folding laundry after her second shift, or how her father double-checked the bus fare before handing it to her each morning. This performance wasn't just about music. It was about proving that their sacrifices meant something. The piano itself wasn't kind to her. One of the middle C keys stuck if you pressed it too softly, and the pedal squeaked like a startled mouse every time she used it. Still, it was free, and the center let her use it as long as no one else needed the room. That was the deal. First come, first served. So she came early, stayed late, and tried not to mind when her fingers ached or when the melody sounded more like a question than a statement. She was in the middle of a tricky passage, her left hand stumbling over a run of 16th notes when the door creaked open without a knock. She flinched, her fingers freezing mid-phrase. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with thick silver hair combed back neatly and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. He wore a crisp, button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and held the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. The girl clutched a paint-splattered tote bag and peeked around his leg with wide, curious eyes. The man didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching her like she'd trespassed on private property. She cleared her throat and offered a small, nervous smile. "Hi, sorry, I didn't hear you come in." He stepped inside without invitation, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. "You're making a racket," he said flatly. Her smile vanished. I'm practicing. For a competition." "Sounds like you're torturing that piano," he replied, voice dry as old paper. "Do you even know what you're playing?" She blinked, stung. "It's Chopin." "The Nocturne," he snorted softly. "Chopin deserves better than that." He glanced at his watch, then at the little girl. "We're here to pick up Lily from art class, but I can't have this noise echoing through the hallway while I wait." She felt her cheeks burn. "I can stop," she mumbled, already gathering her sheet music with trembling hands. "I didn't know anyone was good," he cut in. "Because this isn't a concert hall. It's a community center. And if you're going to play, you should at least do it properly. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time, including your own." The words landed like stones. She nodded quickly, unable to meet his eyes. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed hard, refusing to cry in front of him. She shoved the music into her backpack, zipped it up with more force than necessary, and stood. The little girl, Lily, tugged on the man's sleeve. "Grandpa, is she in trouble?" "No," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "She's just unprepared, that did it." A hot tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She turned away fast, pretending to adjust the strap of her bag. She didn't want him to see. She didn't want anyone to see. She walked past them quickly, head down, shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard Lily whisper, "Why was she sad?" "Never mind," the man said, his voice softer now but still firm. "Let's go." She didn't look back. Outside, the late afternoon air was cool against her skin, but it didn't help. Her chest felt heavy, like someone had wrapped a thick blanket around her heart and tied it tight. All the confidence she'd built over weeks of practice had just been stripped away in less than a minute by a stranger who didn't even know her name. She walked home slowly, past the laundromat, the corner store, the bus stop where her dad sometimes waited for her after work. She replayed his words in her head. "You're just wasting everyone's time." Was he right? Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe she never would be. The competition was in 10 days. What was the point? At home, her mother was chopping vegetables in the kitchen. "How was practice?" she asked without looking up. "Fine," the girl said, dropping her bag by the door. Her mother paused, knife hovering over a carrot. "You sound tired." "I'm okay," she lied, heading to her room. She closed the door gently and sat on the edge of her bed. On her nightstand sat a small photo of her grandmother back in their home country, smiling beside an old piano. Her grandmother had been the one who first taught her to play, on a keyboard made of cardboard boxes and bottle caps when they couldn't afford real instruments. "Music isn't about being perfect," her grandmother used to say. "It's about telling your truth." But what if her truth wasn't good enough for people like that man? She didn't touch the piano that night, or the next morning. She almost skipped practice the following day, too. But something, maybe stubbornness, maybe guilt, maybe just the ghost of her grandmother's voice, made her go back to the community center. She arrived early, hoping to avoid anyone. The music room was empty. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. Then, instead of Chopin, she played something else, something her grandmother used to hum while cooking. A simple melody, no fancy runs, no dramatic crescendos, just a quiet tune that felt like home. She didn't know it yet, but someone was listening from the hallway. And this time he wouldn't interrupt, but that was tomorrow. Today, she just needed to remember why she started playing in the first place. Not for judges, not for trophies, not even for her parents. But for herself. For the girl who once believed a cardboard piano could make real music, and so, with tears dried and resolve quietly rebuilding, she played softly, honestly, alone, outside. The world kept moving. Cars honked, kids laughed. Buses rumbled down the street, but in that small room, for a few precious minutes, there was only her and the piano, speaking the same language again. She didn't know it yet. But that simple melody would soon echo far beyond those four walls. It would reach someone who hadn't listened to music in 2 years. Someone who'd locked his heart away after losing the person who filled his life with song. But all of that was still ahead. For now, she just played. And for the first time in days, it felt like enough. 2 days had passed since the girl left the community center with her head down and her heart heavy. She'd gone back the next afternoon, not because she wanted to face that man again, but because quitting felt like letting him win. So she returned quietly early before anyone else was around and played. Not Chopin this time. Not the flashy, complicated pieces her teacher kept pushing her toward. Instead, she chose something softer, something older. A song her grandmother used to hum while stirring soup on rainy afternoons. Debussy's Clair de Lune. She didn't know much about the composer, only that the music felt like moonlight on still water, gentle, shimmering, full of quiet longing. Her fingers weren't perfect. Sometimes she missed a note or rushed a phrase, but for the first time in weeks she wasn't playing to impress. She was playing to remember, to breathe, to heal. She didn't see him at first. He'd come to the center again to pick up his granddaughter from art class just like before. But this time, as he walked down the hallway, a different sound stopped him cold. Not the stiff, hesitant Chopin from before, but something fluid, something aching and beautiful. It floated through the half-open door of the music room like a whisper from another lifetime. He froze. His hand, still holding his granddaughter's, went slack. The little girl looked up at him confused. "Grandpa? You okay?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because that melody, those exact notes, had once filled his living room every Sunday morning for 42 years. His wife used to play it while the coffee brewed. She'd sit at their old baby grand, barefoot in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, fingers moving with a calm certainty that always amazed him. He'd stand in the kitchen doorway, mug in hand, watching her, listening, feeling the weight of the week lift off his shoulders. Courtrooms, verdicts, angry lawyers, sleepless nights, they all faded away in those moments. All that existed was her, the piano, and that song. After she got sick, she couldn't play anymore. The arthritis in her hands made it too painful. But even then, she'd hum it while folding laundry or watering the plants on their porch. And on the last morning, she was awake, lucid and clear-eyed. She'd asked him to put on a recording of Clair de Lune. He'd held her hand as the music played, tears streaming down his face, knowing it was goodbye. He hadn't listened to it since, couldn't bear to. Not even by accident. He'd skipped radio stations, turned off movies, walked out of stores if it started playing over the speakers. It hurt too much, like opening a wound that had just begun to scab over. And now here it was, alive again in this plain little room with peeling paint and a squeaky chair. He let go of his granddaughter's hand and took a slow step toward the door. He didn't mean to eavesdrop. He just needed to be sure. Maybe it was a recording. Maybe he was imagining things. But no. There she was, the same girl from before, sitting at the piano, eyes closed, shoulders relaxed, playing with a tenderness that surprised him. Her earlier performance had been stiff, nervous, full of effort. This was different. This was feeling. She wasn't showing off. She was sharing something private. He leaned against the doorframe, arms no longer crossed, posture no longer rigid. His usual scowl had vanished, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. He watched as her fingers moved over the keys, not with technical perfection, but with honesty. And in that honesty, he heard his wife's voice again. Not in words, but in the spaces between the notes. His granddaughter tugged at his sleeve. "Grandpa, why are you crying?" He hadn't even realized tears were running down his cheeks. He wiped them quickly with the back of his hand, embarrassed, but didn't look away from the girl at the piano. "Because it's a special song," he whispered, voice rough. "Who's it for?" He hesitated. "For someone I loved very much." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than she let on. She didn't ask more questions. She just stood beside him, quiet, listening. Inside the room, the girl reached the final measures of the piece. The music slowed, softened, like footsteps fading into the distance. The last note hung in the air for a long moment before dissolving into silence. Only then did she open her eyes. And that's when she saw him. Her breath caught. She stiffened instantly, fingers curling into her palms. Oh no, not again. She braced herself for another cutting remark, another dismissal, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there, eyes red-rimmed, expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. Then slowly, he stepped fully into the room. His movements were careful, almost reverent, like he was entering a sacred space. I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. Gone was the sharp edge, the impatience. In its place was something softer, almost fragile. She swallowed. "It's okay," she managed. He glanced at the piano, then back at her. "You played?" "Clair de Lune," she nodded. "Yeah, I've been practicing it. Why that one?" he asked, not accusingly, just curious. She looked down at her hands. "It reminds me of my grandmother. She used to sing it when I was little, before we moved here." He was quiet for a beat, then very softly, "My wife used to play it too." The words hung between them, simple but heavy. She looked up, surprised. "Really?" He nodded, eyes distant. "Every Sunday. For decades, it was her favorite." Something shifted in the room then. The air felt lighter, warmer. The tension that had coiled in her chest since their first meeting began to loosen. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "About your wife." He gave a small, tight nod. "She passed 2 years ago. I lost my grandma last year," she offered. "Cancer." He met her eyes then, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Not as a noisy teenager, but as someone who understood loss, who carried it in their bones. They stood in silence again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was shared. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You play it." Differently than she did. But it still sounds like her. She didn't know what to say to that. So she just said, "Thank you." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Do you come here often?" "Most afternoons," she said. "When the room's free." He nodded slowly. "I might stop by again, if that's all right." She managed a small smile. "Yeah, that's all right." He gave a curt nod, old habits dying hard, and walked out, his granddaughter trailing behind him. But before the door closed, she heard the little girl whisper, "Grandpa, can we come back tomorrow?" And for the first time in a long time, the man didn't say no. That night, the girl didn't rush through her homework just to get to the piano. She took her time. She thought about the way his face had changed when he heard the music, how the hardness melted away, revealing something tender underneath. She thought about how grief could live in a song, how it could connect strangers across generations. The next day, she returned to the center earlier than usual. She didn't know if he'd really come back, but part of her hoped he would, and he did. He didn't speak at first, just sat in one of the folding chairs near the back, hands resting on his knees, watching as she practiced. She played Clair de Lune again, this time with more confidence, more feeling. When she finished, he didn't clap, but he gave a single, slow nod, and that meant more than any applause. Over the next few days, this became their quiet routine. He'd arrive around 4, sit in the same chair, listen without interrupting. Sometimes he'd bring his granddaughter, who'd color quietly in the corner. Other times it was just the two of them, him in his chair, her at the piano, bound by a song neither of them owned but both of them needed. One afternoon, after she finished playing, he spoke. My wife. She believed music wasn't about being perfect. She said it was about saying what words couldn't. The girl looked at him surprised. My grandma said almost the exact same thing. He smiled then. A real smile, small but genuine. Maybe they would have liked each other. I think they would have, she said. And in that moment something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a kind of peace. Two people from different worlds carrying different kinds of sorrow, finding a little light in the same melody. He didn't apologize for what he'd said that first day. He didn't need to. His presence was apology enough, and she didn't hold it against him. Because she saw now he hadn't been cruel. He'd just been hurting. Sometimes the people who seem the coldest are the ones who've loved the deepest. And sometimes all it takes is one song to remind them, and us, that love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. As the days passed, the girl began to play not just for herself or her family, but for him too. Not to impress, but to honor, to keep a memory alive, and he, in turn, started to listen. Not just with his ears, but with his heart. Neither of them knew it yet. But this quiet exchange was about to lead them both somewhere neither expected. To a stage, a choice, and a moment that would change everything. But for now, in that humble room with the squeaky piano and the afternoon sun, they had this. A shared silence, a remembered song, and the first fragile threads of something like healing. By the end of the week, something had quietly shifted between them. What started as an awkward encounter, almost a collision, had settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. He'd show up around 4, sometimes with his granddaughter, sometimes alone. She'd be at the piano, already warming up, and without a word, he'd take his usual seat in the back. No interruptions. No critiques. Just presence. She noticed little things about him now. The way his eyes softened when she played the slower passages, how he'd sometimes close them, like he was seeing something far away. Once, when she hit a wrong note and winced, he didn't sigh or frown. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head as if to say, "It's okay. Keep going." And she did. One rainy Tuesday, the community center was nearly empty. The storm had kept most people away, but she'd come anyway, wrapped in a too-big hoodie, hair damp from the walk. He was already there, sitting in the same chair, holding a paper cup of coffee from the gas station down the street. He nodded when she came in, and she nodded back. She didn't start with Chopin or even Debussy. Instead, she played a folk tune her grandmother used to sing, a simple melody with a lopsided rhythm, full of warmth and memory. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That sounded like home," he said finally. She smiled. "It was. My grandma used to sing it while she kneaded dough. Said the rhythm helped the bread rise." He chuckled. A low, rumbling sound she hadn't heard before. Eleanor used to hum while she gardened. "Drove the neighbors crazy," she said. But the roses bloomed better when she did. They talked like that sometimes now, short exchanges, little windows into their lives. He told her how his wife had been a music teacher before they met, how she'd once played for a small orchestra in college, how she never cared about fame, only about how music made people feel. The girl shared how her first piano was a drawing on cardboard, how she'd press imaginary keys for hours until her fingers ached, dreaming of real sound. "You've got real sound now," he said one afternoon, after she'd played a particularly expressive passage. "And it's not just notes, it's feeling." She looked at him surprised. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said, and there was no doubt in his voice. That meant more than any trophy ever could. As the days passed, she began to understand why he'd been so harsh that first day. It wasn't that he disliked her playing. It was that he loved music too much to hear it treated carelessly. And maybe, just maybe, hearing her struggle with Chopin had reminded him of all the things he'd lost. The precision, the beauty, the joy his wife brought to every performance. He hadn't been angry at her. He'd been grieving. Now, though, something had changed. He wasn't just listening, he was remembering. And in remembering, he was starting to heal. One afternoon, after his granddaughter had been picked up by her mother, He lingered longer than usual. The girl was packing up her sheet music when he cleared his throat. "Do you know why she loved Claire de Lune so much?" he asked. She shook her head. She said it sounded like moonlight on water, calm but full of hidden depth. She said it wasn't about showing off. It was about stillness, about being honest. The girl thought about that. "I think that's why I like it too. It doesn't ask for applause. It just asks you to listen." He looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was seeing not just a teenager with nervous fingers, but someone who understood something most adults never did. "You're going to play in that competition next week, aren't you?" he asked. She nodded, suddenly nervous again. "Yeah, but I'm still not sure what to play." "You've been practicing Chopin?" "I have." "But," she hesitated, "it doesn't feel right anymore." "Not after," well, after this, he understood. "You're thinking of playing Debussy instead?" She bit her lip. "Is that crazy? Everyone else will be playing flashy pieces. Judges love technical stuff." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The best music isn't played for judges. It's played for people." She looked at him, waiting. "My wife once told me," he continued, "that if you play something that moves even one person in the room, you've done your job. Doesn't matter if it's perfect. Doesn't matter if it's complicated. If it reaches someone, really reaches them, that's the point." She felt a lump form in her throat. What if no one feels it? What if someone does? He countered gently. What if that one person needed to hear it more than anything? She didn't answer, but she knew. The next day she came to the center with a new plan. She'd decided she would play Claire de Lune at the competition. Not because it was easy, but because it was true. Because it carried stories, her grandmother's, his wife's, and now somehow theirs too. When he walked in that afternoon, she didn't say anything at first. She just sat down and began to play. Not the whole piece, just the opening bars, slow and deliberate, like she was testing the waters. He sat down without a word, but this time he didn't stay in the back. He moved the folding chair closer, just a few feet from the piano, and sat with his hands folded in his lap, eyes closed. She played the entire piece, pouring everything into it, her doubts, her hopes, her grief, her gratitude. When she finished, the room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the old radiator in the corner. He opened his eyes. They were glistening. That, he said, voice thick, was for her. She nodded. "And for my grandma." "And for you," he added. She hadn't thought of that. But he was right. It was for her too. For the girl who'd been told she wasn't good enough, who'd almost given up, who'd found her voice again in the most unexpected place. After a while, he stood. "I'll be there," he said simply. "At the competition?" "Yes," she blinked. "You don't have to—" "I want to," he interrupted gently. "I think—" She'd want me to. She didn't ask who he meant. She already knew. That night she practiced not to fix mistakes, but to deepen the feeling. She played until her fingers were tired, until the melody lived in her bones. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the stage. She was ready to share something real. The day before the competition, she arrived at the center to find a small envelope on the piano bench. Her name wasn't on it, but she knew who it was from. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note. "Play it like you mean it. Because you do. H." She smiled, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into her music folder. The next morning, she woke early. Her parents made her favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast with extra butter, and didn't say much, but their eyes said everything. They were proud, nervous, hopeful. She dressed in the simple black dress her mother had bought for the occasion. No sparkles, no frills, just clean lines and quiet dignity. She packed her folder, her lucky hairpin, a gift from her grandmother, and the note. At the venue, a small auditorium at the local college, kids milled around with sheet music clutched in sweaty hands. Parents whispered encouragement. Teachers adjusted ties and smoothed dresses. The air buzzed with nerves and ambition. She found a quiet corner backstage and sat down, breathing slowly. She ran her fingers over the keys of the practice piano, not playing, just feeling the smooth ivory under her skin. Then, through the crowd, she saw him. He stood near the back of the auditorium, hands in his coat pockets, looking out of place among the younger parents and excited siblings. But he was there, alone, watching. Their eyes met across the room. He didn't wave, didn't smile. but he gave a single firm nod like a promise. She nodded back, and in that silent exchange, she felt it. She wasn't alone. Whatever happened on that stage, she'd already won something far more valuable than a trophy. She'd found her truth, and someone had listened. Now all she had to do was play it. Backstage, the air smelled like dust, old wood, and nervous sweat. Kids paced in circles, muttering fingerings under their breath. One boy kept playing the same four-note phrase over and over on a silent keyboard drawn on his palm. A girl near the curtain adjusted her dress for the 10th time, her knuckles white around her sheet music. Everyone was trying to look calm, but you could feel the tension humming in the room like a live wire. She sat on a folding chair in the corner, eyes closed, hands resting in her lap. She wasn't rehearsing in her head. She wasn't counting beats or checking tempos. She was remembering. Her grandmother's voice humming in the kitchen, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the quiet strength in the old man's eyes when he'd said, "Play it like you mean it." Her name was called. "Next performer, please." She stood. Her legs felt light, like they might float away, but her feet stayed grounded. She smoothed her dress, took a slow breath, and walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, too bright, and for a second she couldn't see past the first few rows. But then her eyes adjusted, and there he was, sitting alone in the very back near the exit door, just like he'd been in the community center. Same posture, same stillness. He didn't wave, didn't smile, but he was watching, and that was enough. She walked to the piano, a sleek black grand, nothing like the creaky upright she'd practiced on. She sat down, adjusted the bench, placed her hands over the keys. The silence in the room grew heavier. She could hear someone cough, a program rustle. Her own heartbeat. She'd planned to play Chopin. That's what she'd told her teacher. That's what everyone expected. But standing backstage, listening to the polished, fast-fingered performances before hers, something had shifted. Those pieces were impressive, flawless even, but they didn't feel like her. They didn't carry the weight of what she'd lived through this past week. They didn't hold the memory of two women who'd loved music more than perfection, so she made a choice. She turned slightly toward the audience. "I was going to play Chopin," she said, her voice quieter than she'd hoped but clear. "But I've decided to play something else. It's called Clair de Lune by Debussy. It's a song about stillness and memory." A few people shifted in their seats. Some looked confused, others curious. In the front row, one of the judges, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward slightly. She turned back to the piano, closed her eyes, and began. The first notes came out softer than she'd intended, almost hesitant. But then she remembered the old man's words. It's not about being perfect. It's about saying what words can't, so she let go. She stopped trying to control every note and started letting the music breathe. Her fingers found their way. Not with showy speed, but with care. She lingered on the quiet parts. Let the silences speak. When she reached the rising passage in the middle, the part that always made her think of moonlight breaking through clouds, she didn't rush it. She let it swell gently like a sigh. In the back row, the man sat perfectly still. His hands, usually clenched or folded tightly, lay open on his knees. His eyes never left the stage. With every phrase, something in his face softened, like ice melting under warm sun. He wasn't just hearing the music. He was remembering. Her hands on the keys. The way she'd hum while making tea. The Sunday mornings when the whole world felt quiet and kind. Near the end of the piece, his granddaughter, sitting beside him, brought along despite her mother's hesitation, reached for his hand. He took it without looking down. His thumb brushed over her small fingers, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel the crushing weight of absence. He felt presence, connection, love that hadn't died. It had just changed shape. On stage, the girl played the final notes with a tenderness that surprised even her. The last chord faded slowly, like a breath held too long finally released. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment, eyes still closed, not ready to come back to the room just yet. Then silence. Not the awkward kind. Not the was that it kind. This was a deep, respectful silence. The kind that comes when something real has just happened, and then, from the back row, one pair of hands began to clap. Just one. The man stood slowly, still clapping, his eyes glistening. A few people turned to look at him, startled. But then, one by one, others joined in. Not the polite, automatic applause that usually followed performances, but something warmer, slower, fuller. By the time she stood to bow, the whole room was on its feet. She looked out at them, really looked, and saw faces not of judges or strangers, but of people who'd been touched. A woman in the third row was wiping her eyes. A boy near the aisle had stopped fidgeting and was staring at the piano like he'd just discovered something new. And in the very back, the man nodded once, firmly, like he was saying, "You did it." She walked off stage on legs that trembled, but not from fear, from relief, from joy. Back in the green room, her teacher rushed over. "That was unexpected," she said, but her voice was kind. "It wasn't what we rehearsed, but it was beautiful." Her parents hugged her tight. Her mother whispered, "Your grandmother would have cried," and her father just held her a little longer than usual, his voice thick when he finally said, "You played like her." She smiled, but her eyes kept drifting to the door, wondering if he'd leave without saying goodbye. But he didn't. A few minutes later, as the next performer was being announced, he appeared in the doorway. He didn't come all the way in, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking a little out of place among the excited families and chattering kids. She excused herself and walked over. "You were amazing," he said simply. "Thank you," she said. "For being there," he nodded. She would have loved it. They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the competition muffled behind them. "I didn't win," she said quietly. "I heard the scores. I didn't even place." He looked at her, surprised. "Does it matter?" She thought about it. "Not really. Not today." "Good," he said, "because you gave them something no trophy can measure." She smiled. "I played it for her, and for you, and for yourself," he added gently. "Don't forget that." She didn't. Later, as the awards ceremony wrapped up and people began to leave, she saw him waiting near the exit. He handed her a small, carefully wrapped package, no bow, just brown paper and twine. "What's this?" she asked. "Something she would have wanted you to have." She opened it right there. Inside was an old sheet music book, its cover worn soft with age. On the inside cover, in delicate cursive, was a name, Eleanor, and in the margins of the pages, tiny notes in pencil, reminders, fingerings, little hearts drawn beside favorite passages. "She used to say the best music lives in the spaces between the notes," he said, "and in the hands of someone who understands that." The girl held the book like it was made of glass. "I'll take care of it. I know you will." They didn't say much more. No grand speeches. No promises of forever. Just a quiet understanding that something important had passed between them. Not just a song, but a kind of trust. As she walked home that evening, the book tucked safely under her arm, she didn't feel like a loser. She didn't feel like a kid who'd played the wrong piece. She felt seen, heard, known, and in a world that often values speed over soul, noise over nuance, that was everything. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something new. A friendship built on shared silence, mutual respect, and the quiet power of a single song that refused to be forgotten. But for now, under the soft glow of streetlights and a sky just starting to darken, she walked with her head high, carrying not a trophy, but something far more precious. The certainty that her music mattered. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. A week after the competition, the girl returned to the community center, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The piano still squeaked. The light still flickered in the corner. But everything felt different now. She didn't sit down to prove anything. She sat down to remember, to give thanks. She opened the old sheet music book he'd given her. The pages smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. In the margins, tiny pencil notes whispered advice. "Slow here, feel the space." Or, "Don't rush the left hand, it carries the heart." She ran her fingers over the handwriting, imagining the woman who'd written them. Kind eyes, steady hands, a love for music that wasn't about applause, but about connection. She played Claire de Lune again, this time using Eleanor's fingerings. It felt like being guided by a gentle hand from the past. Halfway through, the door opened. She didn't stop playing. She knew who it was. He walked in quietly, carrying a paper bag from the bakery down the street. He set it on the piano bench, still warm, and sat in his usual chair. No words, just presence. When she finished, he nodded. She'd say you honored her. I hope so, she said. He reached into the bag and pulled out 2 cinnamon rolls. Handed her one. They ate in comfortable silence, the sweet scent mixing with the old wood and dust. After that day, their visits became something more than routine. They became ritual. He'd bring pastries or coffee. She'd play pieces from Eleanor's book, sometimes asking questions about the notes in the margins. He'd answer slowly, like each memory was a fragile thing he was handing her carefully. One afternoon, he arrived with a folder under his arm. I spoke to the center director, he said. About the piano. She looked up, surprised. What about it? It's falling apart. Keys sticking, pedals groaning. It's not fair to you or to anyone who wants to learn, she shrugged. It's free, and it works. Mostly he opened the folder. Inside were papers, numbers, a letter. I'm donating a new one. In Eleanor's name, her eyes widened. You're what? A proper upright. Good action, tuned regularly. Something that deserves your hands on it. She didn't know what to say. That's too much. It's not, he said firmly. Music like yours. It shouldn't be played on a broken instrument. And this place? It should be a place where kids feel welcome, not like they're begging for time on a dying piano. She looked at him. Really looked. The sternness was still there. The set of his jaw, the straight posture, but it was wrapped now in something softer. Purpose. Care. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. The delivery's next week. They'll put a small plaque on it. Just her name and the year. She imagined it. A new piano, polished and ready, sitting where the old one had been. A quiet tribute. A living gift. The day the new piano arrived, the whole center buzzed with excitement. Kids gathered around, touching the smooth wood, pressing keys just to hear the clear, bright sound. The girl stood back, watching. When the movers left, she walked over slowly, like approaching something sacred. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, played the first 4 notes of Clair de Lune. It sounded like hope. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but his eyes were warm. His granddaughter tugged his sleeve. Can I play too, Grandpa? He smiled. Not yet, but soon. Over the next few months, the music room changed, not just because of the piano, but because of what it represented. More kids started coming, not just for lessons, but to listen, to try to feel welcome. The girl began helping younger students with their scales, showing them how to find the music beneath the notes. She didn't call herself a teacher. She just said, let me show you how my grandma taught me. And he kept coming, every Tuesday and Thursday. Sometimes he'd bring sheet music he'd found in Eleanor's old closet. Sometimes he'd just sit and listen, eyes closed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. One spring afternoon, as sunlight poured through the windows, he stayed after she'd finished playing. I've been thinking, he said, about the youth showcase next year. She looked up. Yeah? You should enter again, she laughed softly. I didn't even place last time. That's not why you play, he said. And it's not why they should hear you, she thought about it. Maybe, but I don't need a stage to play. No, he agreed. But sometimes the world needs to hear what you have to say. She didn't answer right away, but she knew he was right. Later that week, the center director called her into the office. We've had a few parents ask about lessons, she said. They heard you playing, said their kids came home talking about the girl who made the piano cry. The girl blushed. I don't know much about teaching. You don't have to know everything, the director said. You just have to care, so she started. One student at first, a shy 8-year-old who couldn't reach the pedals. Then another. And another. She taught them scales, yes, but also how to listen, how to feel the music, not just play it. She told them about her grandmother, about Eleanor, about how music isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest, and through it all he watched. Proud but never saying it out loud. He didn't need to. She could see it in the way he lingered after lessons, in the way he'd sometimes hum along to the songs the kids played. One evening, as they sat outside the center on a bench watching the sunset paint the sky in soft oranges and purples, he spoke quietly. I used to think music died with her, he said, that after she was gone there'd be nothing left but silence. She looked at him. But you brought it back. Not the same, but alive. She didn't say anything. She just leaned her shoulder gently against his arm, a small gesture of gratitude, of kinship. He didn't pull away. Years later, People in the neighborhood would talk about the little music room at the East Side Community Center. They'd mention the piano with the small brass plaque. They'd tell stories about the girl who turned heartbreak into harmony, and the old judge who learned to listen again. But to them, it was never about fame or legacy. It was about Tuesday afternoons, cinnamon rolls, shared silences, a song that bridged two lifetimes, and every now and then, when the room was empty and the light was just right, someone would swear they could hear two melodies playing at once. One young, one remembered, blending together like moonlight on still water. Because sometimes, the most broken hearts heal not with grand gestures, but with a single note played with truth, and sometimes, the toughest people are the ones who love the deepest. In that small room, with its new piano and old memories, music didn't just live, it grew.